Has Reacher reached its quota for cliches in Season 2? The first season of Reacher was immensely successful. It introduced us to a fascinating character who had been largely underrepresented in his 2012 film debut. Reacher has captivated audiences with his personality and size, and Richardson's portrayal has led audiences to forget about Tom Cruise's movies. As stated, this incarnation of Reacher is far closer to that of the original Lee Child's novels than those we've seen before. Childs described him as having a six-pack like a cobbled city street, a chest like a suit of NFL armor, biceps like basketballs, and subcutaneous fat like a Kleenex tissue. The show's producers made sure that their Reacher would fit this description. They found him in Alan Ritchson with the best performance of his career. The 41-year-old actor seems to have been created specifically for the role. As for his personality, Richardson imbues Jack Reacher with the calm of someone who has seen and done things that others will never understand. He trusts very few people, but the ones he does are given the privilege of complete confidence. He has a very specific moral compass and is prone to statements like, "I'm a man with a rule. People leave me and my pals alone. I leave them alone. They don't, I don't." He understands the gravity of his presence and does not hesitate to be the winner in any physical altercation. His military background has given him a place to hone and prove his skills, and now, as a wandering man with nothing to his name except a literal clothes on his back, he is Bruce Banner and the Hulk rolled into one. Reacher Season 2 brings the cliches. The team is made up of Reacher, Frances Neagley, Maria Sten, Carla Dixon, Serene DeSwan, and David O'Donnell, Sean Sipos. The team comes together partly out of loyalty and partly for self-preservation when they find that 3 of their 9 teammates are dead. Who killed them? What was the motivation? Reacher is forced to reckon with his past and the lives of those who served under him. It is also an issue of trust, as the one person they need to find may be one of the people who was once his closest ally. Although this plotline is fascinating to watch, the second season of the show attempts to create something much bigger than Season 1. Where the first season took place in a single small town, this new season sees Reacher and his team traveling the country. This means that suddenly we are looking at the passage of time in an entirely different way. People travel to Boston, Colorado, New York, and back in a very loosey-goosey fashion. Whereas Season 1 felt like we were living day to day, Season 2 attempts to give us stakes without a proper timeline. They are on a race to find information, but it appears time speeds up and slows down at will. Then we have the fact that Reacher is given a love interest. This is a fiercely independent man who seems to have trouble with attachment. Yet, in both seasons of the show, he has found a physical relationship that appears to exist for 2 reasons. A chance for Richardson to take off his clothes, and for us to see that he's just as human as the next guy. However, where his first season relationship with Roscoe seemed like 2 similar people with intense superiority issues coming together, Season 2's Carla is shown as a crush he had while leading his team that is now okay because she's no longer his subordinate. The thing is, Reacher doesn't strike one as the kind of person who would even allow himself to have those feelings for someone who is working for him, let alone harbor them for decades. When Reacher debuted its first season on Amazon Prime, the show was met with praise for its gritty action, strong character development, and faithful adaptation of the Jack Reacher novels by Lee Child. Alan Ritchson's portrayal of the titular ex-military policeman was applauded for its physicality, intensity, and subtle sense of justice. While the show capitalized on a familiar formula, muscle-bound hero cleans up a town overrun with crime, fans and critics alike found it refreshingly brutal and fast-paced. But now, as Season 2 hits our screens, some viewers may start wondering, has Reacher hit its stride, or has it also hit a wall? Specifically, has the show leaned too heavily on cliches to maintain its momentum? To address this, it's essential to explore what exactly makes Reacher feel like a series rooted in the traditions of crime thrillers and action-heavy dramas, and whether it has crossed the line into becoming predictable. The unstoppable lone hero. One of the most glaring cliches in Reacher is the concept of the unstoppable lone hero. Jack Reacher is a modern cowboy, traveling from town to town, setting things right, and never getting attached to anyone or any place. This archetype is one of the oldest in fiction, particularly in action stories, where the protagonist is often an enigmatic force of nature who doesn't need anyone's help but is driven by his own moral code. In Season 2, Reacher continues to fill this role perfectly, but for many viewers, this formula can begin to feel predictable. While Reacher is undoubtedly charismatic, with Alan Ritchson's towering presence making him a formidable hero, the trope of the lone wolf who swoops in, defeats evil, and moves on can start to feel a bit worn out. Sure, it's fun watching Reacher beat up the bad guys with calculated efficiency, but without much personal growth or depth in his character beyond his sense of justice, the trope begins to stagnate. However, the show does try to subvert this to some degree. In Season 2, we see Reacher interact more closely with those around him. Though still emotionally detached, the hints of a developing bond with certain characters suggest the writers are trying to break away from the traditional lone hero stereotype. But whether this subtle evolution is enough to keep the character compelling in the long run remains to be seen. Generic bad guys, another area where Reacher Season 2 flirts with cliches, is in his portrayal of villains. Action shows often fall into the trap of featuring cookie-cutter bad guys, corrupt politicians, corporate scumbags, or mercenaries with no moral compass. Reacher Season 2 doesn't stray far from this well-worn path. The antagonists are, for the most part, one-dimensional figures motivated by greed, power, or sadism. They lack the complexity that could make them stand out in the crowded field of television villains. Take, for example, the criminal syndicates Reacher faces in Season 2. They're brutal, organized, and capable, but they're also generic. We've seen this before in countless crime dramas. From Breaking Bad to The Wire to various procedural cop shows, the gang of thugs or corrupt businessmen is a staple of the genre. Season 2 doesn't offer much in the way of unique antagonists who challenge Reacher mentally or emotionally, just physically. This lack of depth in the villains contributes to an overall sense of predictability. We know Reacher will confront them, overpower them, and leave them in the dust. Without a complex adversary to push his limits, the stakes often feel too familiar. The audience has little reason to doubt that Reacher will succeed. The action formula, the action sequences in Reacher are undoubtedly one of the show's highlights. They're expertly choreographed and full of bone-crunching realism. But in Season 2, there's a sense that the show is becoming formulaic in how it approaches these scenes. Reacher is always outnumbered, yet he always wins. He takes punches but never seems to truly struggle. While this makes for entertaining television, it also reinforces a trope that action series frequently fall into: the invincible hero. In Season 2, there are moments when you almost want Reacher to fail, or at least come close to it. But the show seems unwilling to take that risk. Instead, it sticks to a tried-and-true formula where Reacher faces off against multiple opponents and defeats them with relative ease. This pattern can make the action feel less suspenseful and more of a foregone conclusion. Familiar story arcs, Season 2's overarching narrative involves Reacher unraveling a conspiracy that stretches from local crime to high-level corruption. Again, this is well-trodden territory. The idea of a lone protagonist uncovering the truth and taking down a powerful network of bad guys is a plot that countless crime dramas have used over the years. While the show does keep things engaging with twists and turns, the structure of the narrative doesn't feel particularly fresh. Fans of the genre will recognize the beats: the initial mystery, the shocking discovery, the inevitable showdown, and Reacher riding off into the sunset. It's a familiar,